Hey everyone, my name is Gian. I'm a designer and artist, and I'm going to be walking through my logo design process, basically all the things I did to get to this nice little logo right here for my business. And this will be useful for you if you're looking to design your own logo and don't know where to start, especially if you are confused or unsure about the thought process behind it. Like, how do you actually make a good logo? What makes a logo good? And what makes one that would work well for my business or brand? That's what we're going to be walking through. I'm going to be talking about why you need a good logo. I'll give you a high-level walkthrough of the design process for this logo. It's a ton of iterations and thought that went into this. And then I'm going to walk through the roughly 3 stages of design that I went through to arrive at the finalized logo, and then share some tips and tricks if you're trying to do it yourself, as well as some resources. Cool. So let's get into it. To start, you should probably have a brand name already figured out. If not, that's probably the first thing to start with. I'll make a separate video about how I came up with this name and the meaning behind it and all that. But start with the brand name. In this case, the brand name is A Passage Forms, which has some meaning. The tagline I came up with is Human Reminders. And these are just the basis of ideas that you can use for concepts for the logo. Ultimately, you'll want something that works well together, the logo and the name, which will often be seen together and will be the first reflection of your brand. Start with a name, and then start with what is the brand. Is it you? Is it a business separate from you? And in my case, it's just a brand for my art and design projects, exploring certain topics like the ones you see here. This should be a good starting point to start simulating some ideas for what an appropriate logo would look like. With topics like this, it's probably not a fluffy dog. So that's really important to get down so you can narrow in on ideas that are actually appropriate for your brand. Why would you even bother coming up with a logo or trying to make one? Why don't you just, draw something and call it a day? Well, there's a few reasons. One is the logo is a reflection of your brand. It'll probably be one of the first things someone sees and starts to associate with you or your brand, right? So just like here, you'll see different versions of the logo, but you can see I've just started, but it's in a few different places. It's on my website, it's on my shirts, it's on the shirt I did with Thoughtful Coffee. So it's gonna show up in a bunch of places. It should be good because that's gonna form an impression on whoever sees it. Basically, if you have a bad logo, you'll make a bad impression on your potential customers. So you don't wanna do that. Ultimately, it's a shape and some words maybe, but this will be what people reflect and associate with, so you want it to be a good first impression. And this is why companies spend millions of dollars to try and get this right. For some context, I'm not a graphic designer, although I have worked on graphic design stuff just for fun on the side. I do design apps as part of my day job, so I'm applying a lot of my thought process from my day job to this. And I do find visual design and art and things like that fun. With that in mind, I'll keep things high level and not super technical so the average person can understand and actually apply what I'm sharing here to their own logos. So what makes a good logo? Here's a bunch of examples, some you've probably already seen. A good logo to me essentially is just one that appropriately represents the brand. It means it gives off the impression and associations that you want associated with your brand. It could be professional, it could be fun, mysterious, it can be aggressive. There are all these different ideas and concepts that can be communicated just by looking at. If you're already familiar with some of these, then you already have a certain vibe you get just by looking at them. And a lot of that is based on the logo itself, but also the associations we have from years of conditioning and marketing that are connected to these brands already. For our purposes, a good logo is just one that's appropriate, one that suits your brand and reflects your brand well. Part of that is the quality of it, so making a good impression, but also making sure it's suited for the type of brand vibe that you want to give off. And then secondly, this is probably less important, but one that looks good in a lot of different places. So logos are going to be on websites, t-shirts, on billboards and things like that. They're going to be anywhere your brand is, there's probably going to be a logo there. So it just needs to look good in those different places. A general rule for good logos are they are distinct, meaning they don't get mixed up with other similar brands, but they are relatively simple. These on the left are good examples of that. You're not really going to mix up Apple with another company or Nike with another company because they found a shape or a logo that is distinct enough, at least in their space. But those are just rules. Who cares about that shit, right? If you want to make your logo really crazy and intricate, you can do that. You can just change your mind and update your logo later, so I wouldn't overthink it. Okay, so now getting through the actual design process and walking through all the way from the original concepts I came up with to the finalized full polished logo. So here's step 1, the concept. So start with a concept to give yourself some direction. You have your brand name, hopefully. you have what the business is, and then that can be a good basis for ideas. So for me, with these topics in mind, things like mortality and humanity, I thought of, like, that already evokes certain images to me. You can do some research to find what images are associated with your brand based on the concepts you start with. I think it helps to just start thinking about objects or shapes. Usually being too abstract is a little difficult, especially if you're not experienced with design. But for me, I started thinking about an hourglass. It's an interesting shape. There's lots of different styles of it, so maybe there's a lot of different directions to explore there. And then I also thought of an eye. I don't know why. So I put that together here. Here's just some basic, this is a very basic hourglass. By the way, I'm using Figma, it's a design tool. And here's a basic eye I drew, and then tried putting it in different places. This was one concept I came up with, this sort of hourglass type shape. Maybe like if I was working on this, I would invert this and then try and put it together and then make it like an hourglass, right? So exploring these shapes and seeing how they might work, but it's mostly just keeping it really rough and exploring the concept. This is just a few iterations, but I'm like, okay, like hourglass shape, I don't think that fits the vibe. And I moved on to another concept. It usually helps to start with a list. Like if you're a veterinary clinic, you might want to start with like, okay, a dog or a cat, or maybe like a visual representation of a vet, or some like hands that are showing someone taking care of a dog. So you just list things and then start exploring them visually by drawing them out in your design tool or even on paper. Usually, unless you're very experienced with something like Figma, then I would just use a pencil and paper. Okay, so from there I was like, okay, the hourglass concept is interesting, but I'm kind of not feeling it. I don't think that really works. So I started looking at just doorways or entranceways. I thought it just kind of evoked the vibe that I thought would be good to associate with the brand, somewhat mysterious, and then also suggesting people in a way by showing a doorway. So I started with this very simple shape. It's like this, yeah, essentially an archway or doorway. Then I just started moving it around, messing with it, keeping in mind the brand vibe and the things I wanted to reflect. So this is purely visual exploration, just moving things around. Like maybe you can come up with, moving these simple shapes around, you can come up with a lot of different ideas, like rotating them, putting them next to each other, smushing them together, doing things like that. Eventually I moved over here. I think I got some inspiration from, let's see. Okay, well, here's just building on that idea of the archway, putting these different shapes together in different ways, adding different elements like a diamond shape or a hand, and then just recombining them and moving them around and seeing what works. The goal with the concept is to have a basis to iterate on. So you have your concept, in this case, a doorway. And then if you're like, okay, there's something here, that's where you would take your concept and explore and iterate on it and just try and make, basically your goal is to make as many different versions as possible so that you can look at it and see like, is there a good idea here that I can further refine? So that's what I did here. Started incorporating other elements like the letters of the brand name, and then putting the hands in different places, combining the hands with the archway. You can see what I'm doing. I'm just like, okay, what works, what doesn't? And then you'll see these hands themselves are just like roughly drawn. I'm not trying to make anything perfect or polished right now. It's just exploring the different ideas. Okay, so from there, I think I went over here and I was like, okay, this is interesting. So I saw how these three shapes worked on this darker background. By the way, it's helpful to work in black and white, just don't get distracted by colors. I took this and I was like, okay, that looks kind of interesting. What if I just put 3 hands in the archway? And then started moving the positions around here. And I'm like, okay, that looks kind of cool. And then taking that and putting it alongside the brand name to see how it feels. So here's just the basic ideas. Next to the brand name, I'm like, okay, that's kind of a interesting vibe. Does that work? Then exploring other concepts with the hand and the archway. And these are just this is like a random screenshot I got from Pinterest of some, I don't even know what these are. But I was like, okay, that has some shapes that I think are cool. So I just dropped them in here and started putting them together. Continued exploration, building on this doorway idea, and then finding like, okay, I think this hand and archway thing can work for something. It might work really well if I refine it. So I started really messing around with this as well as with the text of the logo, basically trying out different styles, seeing how they might fit together, and then trying to clean it up a bit and put it together on next to the text. So that's really the third stage of designing a logo, if you're following this process, is, refinement. So once you've explored and iterated and you're like, okay, I have a good idea here, which is what I felt like with this hand concept. I have a decent idea. Now is where you would polish it. You'd continue iterating on it, but you're trying to make it more close to a finalized version. So here I drew these hands pretty roughly just to represent the concept. And then I went and like really, basically I took a picture of my hand and then like traced it so that it's higher quality looking. So this actually still looks okay, kind of, for some reason. Okay, so for more exploration, putting the letters together on the hand, seeing what works there. You'll see you won't really see much difference in the refinement stages because I'm just trying to continue to develop the idea I came up with, which is the hands in the archway thing. As I was working on this, thinking back to the brand name and sort of what the brand represents, how does this connect to that? Like, how would these three hands connect to that? So a couple of things came up for me are the three hands and then there being three words in the brand name. That's a pretty strong association that made it feel like the logo could stand on its own as a way to represent the brand, just because there's that visual connection of 3 and 3. On top of that, this is super overthinking, but these words are different sizes. So it's 3 different sizes, kind of like a big, medium, small, like very small. And that's sort of what I was doing here with the hands. So big, medium, small, they're slightly different sizes. And that's also a visual design concept of just harmony and visual interest, is putting different big, medium, small items together in or near each other so that it creates some visual interest instead of like repetition of things that are the same size. And yeah, I think part of it too is it does evoke a bit of mystery. It's like a, you know, a dark doorway, a dark passageway, what is in there? And then, you know, a passageway of course associates with the brand name. So just random, those ideas sort of came up as I was developing this and started to make the logo feel like more of an appropriate, suitable logo to go with the name and the brand. Okay, so I further refined this idea. I gave up on trying to put the letters in because I felt like it was too visually busy. And then I started just trying out different text styles next to the logo, trying to put, like at this stage, if you're refining your logo idea, you can start putting some colors in to see how it might look. And then I arrived at this, which is closer to what the final concept is. So this, I took my like really clean cut archway and then I just traced over it by hand like this. I basically just drew a rough version of the logo and then I cleaned it up a little bit, but still kept some of the imperfections. I think that better represents the humanity aspect of the brand, of people, and that of course goes along with the idea of there being human hands on this. And then from there, I developed this idea of, again, reinforcing the idea of threes. So there's 3 hands here and trying to see if that could work. And I actually got pretty far with using this. I was like, okay, let's explore putting the letters around, see how it works. I was like, and then I even put colors together, seeing how it works, and then different text styles as well. So once you have a logo that you feel pretty good about, that's when you can start exploring color combinations. I don't have much advice here aside from just make sure you can see the logo when the different colors are applied. And you can honestly just steal a color combination from anything you like and no one would notice. So that's what I did here. Came up with some ideas and just find colors that work for your brand, whatever that is. So a problem I realized with this more refined version of this logo is that at a smaller size, it's actually very hard to read. So let's compare it with the Nike logo. There's the Nike logo. And then let me pull this logo in and they're roughly the same size. Okay, so this is what it's like when it's zoomed in. You can obviously see all the detail. And then let's slowly zoom out and see what happens. Okay, so this, you can tell this is still the Nike logo from really far away, but what happens to this logo? It kind of looks like a mess. You can't really see there basically is too much visual noise. It's too complicated to be seen at a small size. And I knew I wanted things to be visible at a small size, like a tiny little logo on a t-shirt, right? Or elsewhere. So I went back and changed it. And if you find that you're like, okay, my logo's like too busy, I can't even see it at a small size and I don't like that, then your goal should just be to simplify it. So try and remove things, basically try and make sure there's less shapes, less edges, and something more similar to a basic shape. So you might say like, okay, this Coca-Cola logo is not a basic shape. Well, it's roughly a rectangular shape or follows that. And then like Starbucks, this is a circle, this is like a check mark, which is a basic shape. And then this is a shield. So try and align it with a basic shape and that'll help with the simplifications. So from there, I basically took this little corner piece. I was like, okay, that's good enough for a logo. So I went like this. I just whoop, like this. And I was like, cool, that's a pretty good logo. Simple enough, Zoom out. It's still somewhat visible when zoomed out. Not as readable as the Nike logo, but still pretty good. I was like, all right, I'm happy with that. I didn't want to keep going because there's also other ways to use time. And then from here, I just explored some colors, put the colors together on the logo, and then I exported it and used it in a bunch of different places, as you can see here, right? So I'm pretty happy with the logo. So once it's refined, you can export and start using it for whatever you want. Some tips I would share for this are to look at logos that you think can work. It helps to look at a bunch of other logos that are simple and effective as a way to get inspiration. So a great website for this is this one called logobook.com. I highly recommend this. It's basically a digital version of, I think, a very popular logo book called Logo Modernism. So you can click through and they're sorted by category, so like by letter, by shape or symbol, and then you get this really nice layout where you can see what type of company it is, as well as who designed the logo if you're interested in that. But then you can see how the name, the logo, and the type of company associate. And that's really important for coming up with. Another website I'd recommend is Google Fonts. So another part of logos that I didn't even dive into are fonts. And fonts can also similarly evoke like a lot of different feelings and associations with a brand. But if you go to Google Fonts, there's all these free to use fonts that you can find. You can sort them by a bunch of different styles and colors and things like that. So that's a good place because I think basically all of them are free to use on whatever you want. I would look at the licenses though. So yeah, so go to these websites, go to logo.com, and then go to fonts.google.com. And these will be a good starting point. But also just keep an eye out for any logos that you think are really cool. You don't even need to overthink it, just logos that you think are cool or work well, and try and incorporate those ideas and create that association with your brand. Last tips, if you see a couple of ideas that you think are interesting, try combining them or changing them slightly in different ways, and you might find some really good ideas. You don't have to start completely from scratch like I did. You can start with like, okay, this V is interesting, but maybe I want to make the angle sharper and see how that works. You don't need to start from scratch, take ideas, steal from people, but change it enough that no one thinks you're stealing, and that's basically it. Don't overthink it. Although logos are important, it's something that changes over time. This was the very first Apple logo. Yeah, it looks crazy. It's like a full drawing. And then they changed it a year later. But yeah, you can always change your logo, so don't overthink it. Don't feel bad if you feel like your logo isn't in place. You can always just pay someone to make a logo for you. You can also just change it later if you don't like it and when your skills get better. So don't overthink it. Yeah, that's it. If you thought this video was helpful, if you learned something, leave a like, subscribe. It's really helpful. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.